Molly Jacobs was an ordinary 16-year-old teenage girl. That is, she was hormonal, perpetually rebellious, and perpetually angry at her mother. Her mother, Linda, was constantly trying to control her and tell her what she was doing wrong, what she should be doing. She didn't like her friends. She didn't like the way she dressed. In short, she was a real control freak. Image was very important to Linda, and she worked hard to make sure that her family was considered a class above the ordinary people in Northfield, Massachusetts, where they lived. Her mother was not popular in school and wanted Molly to be one of those in the know. Linda didn't listen to Molly, never asked her what was important to her, never inquired about her goals and ambitions, never asked how school was going. She didn't even know who her best friends were, but tried to control who she should socialize and be friends with. These personality traits really hindered their relationship, and although Molly understood that her mom only wanted the best for her, Linda's best would never be Molly's best. Molly loved sports and the outdoors. Linda wanted her to play in the orchestra and participate in debates. Molly loved to rebel, had her left ear pierced in every place she could fit, and was thinking about a nose ring. Linda didn't want to hear about it and wouldn't sign the parental permission that was required for it. Molly wanted to dye her hair blue and shave it on one side, but Linda told her an emphatic no, and if she did, she would be grounded for several weeks. Molly's father, Jim, or Jimmy as everyone called him on the other hand, was perfectly calm and had learned from a young age not to worry about nothing. He had witnessed his best friend Van going through difficulties with his father when they were growing up. His father was a born-again Christian, which made him as hypocritical as one could ever be. Perhaps it was just his father, and not the Christians, but Jimmy refrained from judging that for now. Van was not allowed to wear his hair longer and wilder, as was the custom at school. He got haircuts from his father, who always gave him a haircut that looked like the landing deck of an aircraft carrier on top and shaved 1/4 of an inch on the sides. After the haircut, Van had to go to school, where he faced insults and rude comments thrown at him by the school jerks, which often got Van into fights. Jimmy did too, since Jimmy always had his back, and Van always had Jimmy's back. Jimmy saw how Van was affected by little things that wouldn't make a difference in the future, like his hair, and it wasn't worth arguing and fighting over them. In fact, Jimmy encouraged Molly to live as individually as she could, as long as she wasn't hurting herself or others. If she wanted blue hair, Jimmy would say, "Go ahead." If she wanted a nose piercing, Jimmy signed the authorization. Jimmy was calm, but he had two hard rules: no lying and always show loyalty. He told Molly that you had to make your feelings known, that you had to speak up, that you couldn't keep secrets. He said, "Molly, secrets can burn a hole in your personality and your life. Secrets eventually come out, and if they fester for too long, they do more and more damage by the time the secret comes out." His other rule, fidelity, stated, "Be faithful and honest with family, friends, and yourself. You must be true to your morals and ethics. You have to be loyal to your friends, help them make the best decisions, and support them." Because of these qualities, Jimmy had many friends, and this helped him earn a good reputation as a copyright lawyer. He was a partner in a high-tech copyright law firm, which made him quite busy, but he always made time to watch Molly's soccer and softball games, as well as all the school events she participated in. He always made time to go hiking, biking, fishing, canoeing, and camping with her because he knew she was growing up fast, and one day she would no longer be able to do all of these things with Jimmy. His wife, Linda, would sometimes come with him, but usually missed these outings, so Molly and her father had developed an incredibly close bond with each other, and Linda was a little jealous of that, but also didn't consider what they did as something Molly should aspire to. Every Wednesday, Linda had the day off, and she would tell Jimmy and Molly that she would use the day to cook and freeze meals for busy days, or catch up on housework, or go shopping, or maybe visit Mom and Dad. Many times when Molly came home, she would see Jimmy's older brother Dan driving his pickup truck down the street as if he had just been in the house. When she would ask Linda if Uncle Dan had come by, she would sometimes say no, which seemed odd, since why else would his pickup be parked on her block? Sometimes she'd say yes, that Dan had come by to ask her about a landscaping project he was going to help them with, or to borrow Jimmy's tools, or to see if Jimmy was home to talk to him. It all seemed a little odd to her, but her extended family was odd to say the least. Linda usually got home before Molly, who finished school at 5:30 after sports practice, and always got home before Jimmy, which meant no earlier than 6 and no later than 9 in the evening. On this day at school right after lunch, at about 12:30, Molly started having severe cramps caused by her menstrual cycle. She asked her teacher if she could go to the nurse and convinced the nurse to let her go for the afternoon. She pulled out her cell phone and called her mother Linda, but the phone immediately went to voicemail. She tried calling again and got the same result, so she left her a short message. "Mom, I'm not feeling well, so I'm leaving school. It's only 10 blocks, so I'll walk. But if you get this message, you can pick me up. I'll take Maple Street home. Thank you." Molly walked home, but Linda never called back. She's probably working out or shopping or doing something. Figures. She gets mad if I don't answer her calls or texts right away, but when I call her, nothing. Once around the street corner in her neighborhood, she saw Uncle Dan's truck parked in the driveway. He probably needs more tools or something, she thought. Molly walked up to the house and saw that the door was locked, which struck her as a little odd, but instead of ringing the bell, she pulled out her keys and opened the door. The first floor was dark and quiet, and when she returned to the kitchen, no one was there. She dropped her backpack and looked out into the garage to see if Uncle Dan was rummaging through the workbench for tools, but it was empty there too. When she returned to the house, she heard sounds coming from upstairs. Intrigued, she quietly climbed the steps and walked down the hallway to her parents' master bedroom. She peeked behind the door jamb and was stunned to see her mom, Linda, and Uncle Dan. She quickly stepped back, shocked and in tears. She didn't know what to do, but as the anger at her uncle and mom's betrayal of Jimmy's dad and herself crept into her brain, she was angry, very angry. Molly came into the room and shouted, You cheating, damn it! How could you do this to our family? And you, Uncle Dan, you entertained your brother's wife. I hate you both, you miserable pieces of shit." Dan and Linda looked over, confused that someone was there, and then recoiled in horror when they saw Molly filming them and yelling at them. Molly turned and ran down the stairs. Linda screamed, "Oh God, no, Molly, no, please come back. It's not what you think it is. Please, Molly, come here and talk to me." She ran down the hallway after Molly, but Molly was at the front door before Linda could get off the landing at the top of the stairs. Linda ran back in and yelled to Dan, "Get dressed and start the car, we have to catch her. We have to convince her not to tell Jimmy. It will destroy him, and it will destroy us both. Hurry up." Oh God, what have I done? She broke into sobs and Dan shouted, "Okay, you can cry and have a guilt attack later, but get dressed and let's go." Molly ran to the end of their block, across the street and through the backyards of the next 3 blocks. She didn't know what to do. Her phone rang, and she looked down to see Linda calling her. She remained silent until the ringing stopped, and a minute later it rang again. She didn't answer, and the call went to voicemail. She decided to run 1 mile to the 9-mile nature trail by the creek. She and her father used to hike and jog on these trails, and they had a favorite resting place that was located on an elevated area near the creek bank. It was a spot between 5 massive cottonwood trees that formed a small grassy area naturally screened from the trail behind the trees. Daddy and she called this place Our Trees and would sometimes race each other down the trail to see who would get there first. Molly went behind the trees, sat down, put her head in her lap, and began to cry. How could her mom do this to her dad and to her? How could Uncle Dan cheat on Jimmy, her brother, with his wife? Tears streamed down her cheeks. She continued to ignore her mother's calls, not wanting to talk to her, not now and probably never again. She was in trouble, and when that happened, she always reached out to her father. By this time, Linda had called Molly several times, but there was no answer. However, she saw and picked up on Molly's voicemail message that she wasn't feeling well, was leaving school and looking for a hitchhiker. Linda was kissing and fondling Dan on the coach when those calls came in, and she ignored them, figuring that Jimmy was probably just calling to see how things were going, and the last thing she wanted to interrupt was a call from her husband. She was already feeling a sense of guilt that was overlaid with a sense of lust at doing something wrong and secret that added a thrill to her life that she couldn't seem to give up. She had been having fun with Dan behind Jimmy's back and on Wednesdays for about 10 weeks now. She knew it had to end. She knew it was interfering with her relationship with her family. She knew that if word got out about it, her marriage would turn into a complete disaster. But she just didn't have the strength to cut off her relationship with Dan and give up her secret guilt and risky danger. She reasoned that no one else needed her and that this was just for her, that Jimmy would never be hurt. She wouldn't let it interfere with her marriage, though she didn't seem to realize that it was putting an emotional barrier in her relationship with her family, probably because of guilt or what she was doing. If only she had forced herself to think through the possible outcome. How could she have been so stupid as to jeopardize everything that meant anything to her? Now she hated herself for what she had done. Or maybe she only hated the fact that she had been caught. She didn't have time to analyze it all now, but she was afraid she'd have to dig deeper to figure out why the hell she'd taken such a risk. Now that her daughter had called her a whore and run away, it was beginning to dawn on her how many people could be hurt by her actions, including herself. She still didn't understand how she had let it happen. She loved Jimmy and Molly more than anyone in the world and knew that the affair was destroying her marriage, but she couldn't contain the lust she felt at indulging in this secret vice just for herself. But now she couldn't bear to think of what might happen to her family, that she might have ruined the man she loved and her daughter, and thus ruined herself. She frantically called Molly's phone and tried to leave a message to convince her to talk to her and not to tell Jimmy what she had seen, as it would destroy him. Molly continued to ignore Linda's calls and decided that she had to call her father. She called him and he picked up on the second ring. "Hey, little rebel, what's going on? Aren't you at school? Are you okay?" Jimmy could hear the sobs and sniffles of his daughter, who was clearly in distress, on the other end of the line. "Molly, what happened? What happened? Are you hurt? Where are you? Where's your mom?" "Daddy, please come quickly. I need you. I'm at the trees. Don't tell Mom or answer her calls until you get to me. Please." "Why, Molly? Did you and Linda have a big fight? Are you okay? What's going on?" "Just do it, Dad. Just get here as soon as possible. Don't call Mom. Please, please, please just do it." "I'm fine, but I need you now." "Okay, stay safe and don't move. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Jimmy stormed out of the office and, not wanting to waste time explaining himself to his executive administrator, Beth, simply told her, "I've been gone all day. A client is having a breakdown, so I have to run. I'll tell you all about it tomorrow." He ran out of the building to his Porsche SUV. Partners love luxury to make up for all the hours of work and stress. His cell phone rang again, and he saw it was Linda. He didn't answer it as he promised Molly he would. The call stopped and immediately resumed. Starting the Porsche and pulling out of the parking lot, he rushed across town to the nature center. He pulled into the parking lot, jumped out of the car, and in suit, tie, and dress clothes ran down the path until he saw trees. He ran up the bank and entered a small pen, and there sat Molly, curled up in a ball and crying. "Molly, Molly, please, what's wrong?" She threw herself into his arms and hugged him and sobbed even louder, her body shuddering with sobs. He stroked her hair and back, and after 3 or 4 minutes she calmed down. "Molly, did someone hurt you? What happened? Did you and Mommy have a fight?" While he was saying this, another ringing sounded on her phone, which was lying on the ground, and he saw that it was a call from Linda. Picking up the phone, he also noticed that it had 10 missed calls from Linda. Shortly after her phone stopped ringing, his rang and it was Linda. He was about to answer it, but Molly said, "No, Daddy, don't answer it. We need to talk." "Daddy, I don't know what to do. You always told me to tell the truth, to be loyal to my family, not to keep secrets because they eat you up inside. But what if the truth is worse? What if the truth destroys people? What would happen then, Daddy?" "Molly, I can see that you are obviously upset and suffering. It's better to talk openly about the terrible truth and pain where your family and friends can help you, support you, and help you cope." "Okay, Daddy. Oh, Daddy, I'm so sorry. Did Mom call you? If so, did she leave a voicemail? Please play it back. Jimmy looked at her strangely, but opened the phone and played the voicemail message from Linda. Jimmy, I need to talk to you. Molly and I had a fight and she ran away. She's obviously upset, and I don't think she quite understands exactly what she saw that upset her so much. I'm looking for her. Can you call me and tell me where she might be? Or can you call her and tell her to call me? Jimmy, please know that I love only you and Molly and always will. It seemed like a very strange way to end the message, but Jimmy put it aside and looked at Molly. Molly let out a sarcastic growl upon hearing the message. She said to Jimmy, "Now let me turn mine on." She played the first voicemail message from Linda, and in it, Linda could be heard sobbing, saying, "Molly, it's not what you think. It doesn't mean anything, just a harmless and senseless act. Please call me and talk to me about this before you do something stupid. Please talk to me before you talk to Dad." Again, Molly replied, "Yeah, sure, just a harmless act." Jimmy looked at her in confusion and asked, "What's going on, Molly?" Molly replied, "Daddy, just bear with me. Let's turn on the next voice message from Mom." She pressed the play button, and Linda, as if pleading, said, "Molly, please talk to me. Don't tell anyone, especially Dad. It would ruin him and our family." At these words, Molly jumped up and vented her anger. "Yeah, screw you, Mom. You're taking it out on me that I'm ruining the family? What a load of crap. You've got to have such nerve to take it out on me." Jimmy was confused and said, "Molly, you've got to tell me what's going on. Spit it out." Molly replied, "Dad, are you sure? You heard her. It's going to ruin our family, although I think Mom already did it anyway." Jimmy looked at her and said, "Molly, you can't go that far and not tell me. Spill it. What's going on, for heaven's sake?" "I'm so sorry, Daddy. I wasn't feeling well at school, so I decided to go home and called my mom a few times to give me a ride, but her phone was off. I got home, and Uncle Dan's truck was parked in the driveway. The front door was locked, so I unlocked it and went inside. There was no one on the first floor, and then I heard a noise coming from your bedroom, and I quietly went upstairs. I'm so sorry for you, and me, and our family, Dad. Here, you better watch this video, I think." She handed her father the phone, dropped her head to her knees, and began to cry softly again. Jimmy hit the play button, and the entire shocking, disgusting scene Molly had witnessed was shown in full color and with sound. The video was short and ended with Molly's screams and her verbal abuse of Linda and Dan, which brought them out of their state of carnal bliss. The looks on their faces when they saw Molly standing in the doorway were hard to watch. It was a mixture of pleasure, quickly dissipating, then shock, fear, shame, guilt, anger. It all blended into a study of human emotion in less than 5 seconds of screen time. Jimmy had turned off his phone, and now his head was leaning to his knees, and tears were beginning to fall. Why? God, why? How could she do this to us? And to my brother? How could they betray me like that and disrespect me so much? He couldn't bring himself to say more. Molly came close to him and, putting her hand on his shoulder, said, "I'm so sorry, Daddy. I feel the same betrayal and shock. I never want to see any of them again. I hate them for doing this to us, to you, and tearing the family apart." By this time, Linda had been unable to reach Molly or her husband. She called his office, and the receptionist could only say that he had left urgently to see a client and said he wouldn't be back today. She said she would take a message and offered to call him and make sure he knew that his wife was desperate to talk to him. Linda muttered, "No thanks," and hung up. Dan and Linda had given up on the idea of finding her by driving around in his truck, so he walked back to the house and stopped in the driveway. The house was dark, Jimmy's car was gone, and it was doubtful that Molly had returned. Dan looked at her and said, "Linda, I hope Molly doesn't do anything rash or stupid. I hope she doesn't talk to Jimmy. You know he'll never forgive us for that. I think I need to get home before Amanda figures out where I am, and I guess I'll just keep my head down and see what happens. Damn it, why were we so stupid?" Linda looked up at him and could barely speak through sobs and tears. "Drop me off, Dan. I need to think about what I'm going to say to Molly. I have to get to her before Jimmy finds out. I have to convince her that it doesn't mean anything, that if she tells Jimmy, our lives will be ruined. With those words, she called Molly again, and the call went to voicemail again. She sobbed into the receiver. Molly, I'm so sorry. Please realize that it didn't mean anything and it's over. Please call me before you talk to anyone. Please don't tell Jimmy, it will destroy us all. With those words, Linda got out of the car and walked back into the house. She called out to Molly, knowing there would be no answer. She ran to the bedroom, took off the sheets, picked up her scattered clothes, and put new sheets on the bed. That's what she'd done on the Wednesday after Dan left for the past 10 weeks. She sat down on the bed and cried. Why did I do this? Why did I risk my marriage and my family's respect for this? Come to think of it, she didn't even really like Dan. And she certainly didn't love him. Her love for Jimmy had never waned, but looking back on her behavior, she saw how emotionally she had begun to push him and her daughter Molly away. Why did she always pick on Molly so much? When had she stopped having open and loving conversations with Jimmy? When was the last time she made love to him and showed him any meaningful affection or connection? What the hell was wrong with her? She thought long and hard about it. Probably a lot of it had to do with the excitement and trepidation of doing something behind my family's back that was meant just for me. It felt so wrong, but that's partly what made it so exciting. And my life had become so boring, and she felt like no one else needed her. Molly didn't need her, and with Linda's attitude, Molly pulled away from her and broke off her open and loving relationship with Linda. Jimmy didn't need any excitement. He had it all in a fast-paced career as a lawyer that left no time for her. What time he did have, he channeled into Molly, especially since she had pushed him away emotionally. He knew that their lives were completely incomplete, but he stopped to interrogate Linda about what the problem was and whether they should see a counselor. She had turned him down, telling him that everything was fine. She thought he had emotionally withdrawn from her in response, and it seemed that Jimmy didn't need her. But now she realized that it was her fault. Dan had told her how attractive she was and how much he needed her. He couldn't find the same comfort and feelings in his wife Amanda that he was getting from Linda. And since Amanda was 6 months pregnant with their second child, he wasn't getting much attention at home. Their flirting and his constant comments about how beautiful and desirable she was had eventually led to them ending up in bed. But now Linda remembered the look of hurt, pain, disgust, betrayal on Molly's face. Molly had called her a cheap whore, and she couldn't disagree. She also thought of Amanda, about Dan and Jimmy's relationship, about their parents and her parents. Why am I only now realizing how painful and horrible it was? I ruined my life, and I did it without even thinking about the possible consequences or why I did it. She collapsed on the bed, curled up and cried and cried and cried until she fell asleep. Jimmy and Molly remained sitting by the trees, crying and talking to each other intermittently. Molly asked, "What are we going to do, Daddy?" Jimmy replied, "Molly, I don't know what we're going to do. I have so much anger and hurt inside me from being hurt by the women I have loved and shared my life with. And also the older brother I grew up with and thought he always had my back. And now you're in the middle of this mess too, knowing that our family life will never be the same again. I don't know if I can even look at Linda, let alone forgive her, but she's your mom, and you'll always need to maintain a relationship with her, even though it might be hard to understand right now. But right now, let's just get a hotel room and try to calm down, get some rest overnight, and deal with how we feel tomorrow." With those words, they drove downtown and booked a room at the Hilton. Jimmy decided that tomorrow he would work from the room and then call the school office and tell them that Molly was sick. That way, they could work for a couple days and then decide what to do over the weekend. Tomorrow, when Linda would be at work, if she went to work, of course, Jimmy would go to the house and get clothes and toiletries. They would have enough for 3 or 4 days while they decided what to do. Jimmy also called his friend Jack Wilson, who was the district attorney for the city, and briefly told him what was going on. He told Jack that his wife would probably file a missing persons report in the next day or two, and asked Jack if he could suppress the report and take no action, knowing that Molly was safe with Jimmy and they would be contacting Linda soon. Jack reluctantly agreed, but told Jimmy that he could only hold off until next Monday, so Jimmy should talk and make a plan with Linda before then. Molly and Jimmy checked into the Hilton and ordered hamburgers and fries for the room. Then they turned on the TV, lay down in their separate double beds, and watched TV like zombies until sleep finally distracted them from their thoughts, if only for a few hours. Linda woke up around 10 o'clock at night and saw that neither Molly nor Jimmy had called her back. "Oh God, no," she thought. "Jimmy must know, or he would have called long ago or been home. Oh God, what have I done?" She tried calling Jimmy and Molly's cell phones again, but both went straight to voicemail, indicating they were off. She texted Jimmy a message. "Jimmy, I think you know. But please know that it meant nothing, and I only love you. I'm sorry, but you need to let me know that Molly is safe, and you need to come home and talk to me. Please let me explain everything." She really didn't know how or what she would explain to Jimmy. Would he want to know the details? Would it be better if it was limited to that incident and one mistake? She began to think over her story and what she would tell him. She waited until midnight for a call or text reply to her calls, and when none came, she crawled under the covers and tried to sleep. It was a restless night without sleep, full of tears and self-loathing for what she had done and for the pain she knew she had caused. In the morning, Jimmy and Molly woke up early and went to the Hilton for breakfast. Jimmy called the school and said that Molly would be gone for 2 days and called work and said that he would work from home, call his cell phone if he needed to, and his computer if he needed to, but no calls unless he needed to take care of something urgently. He looked at Molly and said, "Molly, I'm very sorry that you saw what you did and that you were dragged into this terrible situation. I think you will enter adulthood and face all the challenges life can present you with sooner than I could have hoped. You're 16 now, and I'm afraid you will now see from an adult perspective how important the things I've been preaching to you are. Loyalty, honesty, truth. Being true to your morals and ethics. As you can see, all sorts of nasty things happen in life, but you have to do your best to live by your own code of right and wrong. Mom, for whatever reason, threw that code out the door with her actions with your Uncle Dan, and trust and deceit can't be undone anymore. I'm going to have to think about what action to take, and since you're stuck in the middle of things, I'm going to let you be with me every step of the way, and help me decide what happens to our family next. First, I'm going to call Dan right now and find out what the hell is going on." Jimmy dialed Dan's number, and Dan picked up and said, "Hold on, Jimmy. Let me step outside so I don't disturb Amanda. We're just getting out of bed." He ran down the stairs and out onto the porch and then said, "What's going on, Jimmy?" Jimmy's anger boiled over and he said, "What the hell do you mean, what's going on? I think you better tell me what's going on. I want you to honestly, no bullshit, tell me why, when, and how long you entertained my wife." Dan immediately fell silent and said, "Jimmy, I'm sorry. It just happened, and once we got started, we went back to it over and over again. But it wasn't about you, Jimmy. And it wasn't that we loved each other or even interested in each other that much. It was purely entertainment. It was just physical relief and a short-lived feeling. I'm sorry, Jimmy, but it didn't really mean anything to either of us. Jimmy, have you talked to Linda? I think you should ask her these questions." "I'm asking you, asshole. How long ago?" Dan replied embarrassed, "For the last 10 weeks, Jimmy. Every Wednesday, always at your house." Jimmy shouted, "Why? Why did you betray me like that?" Dan replied, "Jimmy, it wasn't about you. It was just the way things happened. I just wasn't getting what I wanted with a pregnant Amanda, and I was so infatuated with Linda that I started pursuing her, and we ended up in bed. I'm so sorry. You have to forgive us, and we can work through this, Jimmy. We both love you, and we don't want you to get hurt or your family broken up." Forgive you, huh, Dan? Look, things are different between you and me. I'm never talking to you or visiting you again. If I see you, you better run because I'm going to punch you in the face. You're dead to me now, and I'll never feel like I have a brother again. Dan began to apologize and protest, asking Jimmy to be reasonable and not let this ruin their relationship. Jimmy, it didn't mean anything. It was just sex. It meant everything to me, Dan. You destroyed my marriage, my trust, my faith, and the bond between you and Linda. Do you have any idea how that affected Molly? So don't tell me it doesn't mean anything. It means that neither of you respected or loved us enough not to hurt us the worst. With those words, Jimmy hung up the phone and decided that this was really the last time he would talk to Dan. Thursday and Friday were spent by Molly and Jimmy working in the hotel room, eating room service food, and occasionally falling asleep watching TV and then going outside to get some fresh air. Linda kept calling, but neither of them answered or even listened to the voicemail. Linda was very concerned and didn't know how she could reach them. She also called Dan, but he didn't pick up or return her calls. Finally, on Friday afternoon, she went to the police station to file a missing persons report. She went to the desk of the officer on duty and said, "My daughter has run away, and I want to file a missing persons report and ask for your help in finding her." The officer on duty began writing down her information, and after getting her name, her daughter's name, her husband's name and address, he asked her to wait a few minutes and went off to the back offices. A few minutes later, Jack Wilson, the district attorney, came out of there and introduced himself. He led Linda into the interview room and asked her to take a seat. "Mrs. Jacobs, my name is Jack Wilson, and I'm a friend of your husband, Jimmy. I want you to know that Molly is okay. She's with Jimmy, and he called me and said you could file a missing persons report. He and I agreed that I would give him until the weekend to contact you before taking any action on the missing persons report. Molly is with him. They are both safe, and that is all I can tell you at this point. He will make contact, and if he hasn't by Monday morning, call me and I'll start taking action for the police." With those words, he handed her his card and walked her to the exit. She could feel his accusing stare and lack of respect as he stood up and led her toward the exit. She guessed that Jimmy had told him the story and decided that it would get her nowhere trying to argue with him. Jimmy has a lot of friends and they'd have his back. She walked to her car, got in it, and started crying again. Back at the Hilton, Jimmy looked at Molly and said, "I think we need to talk to your mom and tell her you're okay. Do you want to talk to her?" Molly replied, "No, Daddy. I don't think I ever want to talk to her again. I can't think of a single reason why I would accept what she did, and I can't think of a single apology that would be acceptable. How do you even know she is telling you the truth? How will you ever be able to trust her again? Molly, right now we are hurting. We are in shock and feel betrayed. But time will lessen that pain, and we'll have to decide if we want to move on with our lives or try to work things out as a family. I think we should go to her house, give her a chance to be truthful about the cheating, and then make a decision. We at least need more clothes and toiletries if we're going to continue living in a hotel. Also, you have to go back to school on Monday, so grab your backpack and textbooks and get ready for that. Tell you what, it's Sunday. Let's go there and give her a chance to tell her side of the story, and then we'll decide if we should stay or pick up our stuff and leave. I think we should give her a chance to be truthful and tell us what, why, where, how long, etc." Molly and Jimmy drove up to the house on Sunday morning and walked in the front door. The house was quiet and dark except for the kitchen. They walked into the kitchen, and Linda was sitting at the island drinking coffee and looking into her cup. She looked like she had aged about 10 years since he had last seen her. Her face was puffy, with red blotches. Her eye makeup had been partially washed away by her tears, and she hadn't bothered to wash it off or replace it. Her hair was a mess, uncombed and unwashed. When she looked up and saw them, she immediately jumped up from her chair, ran around the island, and tried to run up to Molly and hug her. Molly threw up her arms and pushed her away and walked to the opposite side of the island, avoiding talking to her mom. Jimmy did the same. Jimmy said, "Linda, we came back to talk to you about what you did and why you think you did it. You've hurt us both tremendously. You've taken away our love and trust in you, and I don't know if what Molly saw and what she videotaped can be brought back. I want to at least give you a chance to tell your side of the story." Linda let out a little cry and her nose dripped. She took a Kleenex, wiped her eyes, blew her nose, and looked at them both. I'm so sorry. Please know that there was nothing wrong with either of you. I love you both more than life, and I don't want to lose you. Jimmy, it was just sex. It meant nothing. It was the first and only time, and it will never happen again. We can get through this. Don't ruin our marriage over a one-time mistake and meaningless fun. After telling that lie, she looked away, and when she turned around, she saw that Jimmy was ready to explode with anger. Looking at Molly, Jimmy said, I think we're going with Plan B. Molly left the kitchen and went up to her room to gather her clothes and personal belongings and grab her backpack. After Molly left the room, Jimmy looked at Linda and shouted, So you're going to use all the standard tricks instead of telling me the truth? It was just meaningless entertainment. It meant nothing. And by the way, your ramblings about it being the first and only time show me that you have no problem lying and deceiving us. I've talked to Dan, and I know this has been going on for 10 weeks and I can't forget that video. So who should I believe now, you or Dan? I know it's you, and I know I'm not going to get any truth or understanding from talking to you. I told Dan that he's dead to me and I'll never see him or talk to him again. It's not easy to do that with you, but that's how I feel at the moment. And don't talk to me about how I ruined our marriage because of one mistake. It wasn't one mistake, it was an ongoing affair that you wouldn't have stopped if Molly hadn't walked in on you. And all you seemed to care about was getting caught. Not because you betrayed and disrespected your family, and you did it with my brother and in my bed, no less. So don't talk to me about throwing away your marriage when you threw it away the first time you started flirting and hooking up with Dan. How do you think your 16-year-old daughter is going to be able to handle what she saw you two doing? I might as well destroy you as I am watching you right now. With those words, Jimmy turned on his heels and ran upstairs to the bedroom. Linda collapsed to the floor and sobbed. She thought she could help her case by lying about how long they had been having an affair and trying to tell him that it was all pointless and he should forgive her. She had never seen him so angry and now wondered if there was even a chance of reconciling with her husband and daughter. She was shocked by the pain and hurt she saw on their faces, but how could she not realize that this was where her betrayal would lead? A few minutes later, Molly and Jimmy came downstairs with their packed suitcases. Jimmy took off his wedding ring, placed it on the counter, and without a word, they left. Linda remained sitting on the kitchen floor, balled up and crying. Jimmy and Molly went back to the Hilton, and Jimmy got on the internet and started looking for apartments that were both close to the school and not too far from his office. He called several rental agencies, and by the end of the day had negotiated a 6-month lease on a fairly new apartment with 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, landscaping, a pool and spa, grills and barbecue tables, and a gym. The next morning, Jimmy drove Molly to school, returned, checked out of the hotel, and moved their limited closet and belongings into the apartment. He told Molly he'd be home when she arrived. The apartment was only 6 blocks from the school, so she could attend sports after school and walk home when practice was over. Jimmy went to work, immediately called the financial planners, and began the work of separating the savings, checking and joint accounts into one account in his name only and one account in Linda's name only. He then contacted a reputable divorce attorney, who he knew had a very good reputation, and set up an appointment for the afternoon. He then called the CFO and corporate counsel from his law firm and asked them to start working on how to protect his ownership as a partner in the firm and how to minimize any distribution of after-tax savings to Roth and pre-tax 401k for his wife. The planners called him back and told him that since he had set up some college funds for his daughter, he could take a very large portion of his joint savings and investment accounts and put them into a trust to fund her college, and they would not be available as part of the divorce settlement. He also changed the beneficiary of the insurance to Molly and gave the parents custody rights over their daughter if anything happened to him before she reached her 18th birthday. 10 days later, the divorce strategy and all of his financial adjustments were ready. He told his attorney to start working on the divorce papers, but not to serve them until they heard from Jimmy. During those 10 days, Linda called and texted Molly and Jimmy, begging to talk, begging to go to couples counseling, begging to come home. Jimmy instructed his office security to keep her off the property. Molly went to the vice principal of the school, told him about the situation, and convinced him that she was not to be allowed on school property either. Around this time, Molly received word from Linda's parents. They called her and left a voicemail message that confused Molly. It basically said that they didn't understand why Molly and Jimmy were treating their daughter so badly over a minor disagreement, and how could they be so cruel as to move out and not talk to her. Molly decided to call Jimmy's parents and see if they had heard anything. She got through to them and asked, "Hi, Grandma, how are you doing? Have you been in touch with your family and what's new? I know we haven't seen you in weeks." They replied that nothing new had happened. They were just waiting for Dan and Amanda to have a baby. They said that Dan and Amanda were coming over for brunch next weekend and asked if Linda, Jimmy, and Molly wanted to come over. Molly quickly realized that no one in the family knew what was going on. Linda obviously hadn't told her parents the real truth, and Dan had never discussed it with Amanda or his parents unless they were incredibly lenient. That night, Linda's sister Sherry called Jimmy's apartment and scolded him for taking Molly away and abandoning Linda for such a minor reason as a disagreement over Molly's schoolwork and friends. "How could you be so cruel, Jimmy? It's not like you at all." Jimmy simply said that there were issues between him and Linda that were personal and would take time to resolve. 20 minutes after that call, Linda's parents called and reported pretty much the same thing. How can you be so cruel to walk out over minor arguments and disagreements? And at the end of the evening, Jimmy's parents called and asked if Linda, Jimmy, and Dan were coming over for brunch. Jimmy asked if Dan and Amanda were okay and if Dan had talked to them at all. Dan said that Jimmy resented him for not returning his tools and that they had a fight about it and weren't talking. Jimmy's mom said, "Come on, Dan, grow up. You can't fight with your family over a little thing like missing tools. Come down this weekend and make up. Besides, we haven't talked to Linda and Molly in a while." Jimmy made the excuse that Molly had a soccer game out of town and they wouldn't be able to make it. Molly realized that Jimmy was trying to serve, but Linda and Dan were not telling anyone the truth about what was really going on. Molly looked at him and said, "It's quite obvious that neither Linda nor Dan have told the family anything close to the real story, and it's your fault." She was furious, but her father just shrugged and said it would sort itself out. 2 weeks later, after much soul-searching, introspection, and conversations with Molly, Jimmy decided that his love for Linda, his resentment for being betrayed, his deception, and his unwillingness to admit that she hadn't kept her wedding vows were too much for him to forgive. Besides, it was obvious that she hadn't taken any responsibility for what she'd done to her family, and neither had Dan. He decided it was over and had his lawyers serve Linda with divorce papers. Linda sat at home trying to decide what strategy she should use to get Jimmy and Molly home so she could get busy repairing her relationship. She realized that she had hurt them, but she still convinced herself that it was just meaningless fun. It was over and things could go back to normal. She told herself that they would miss her and come back, and when they did, she would be the most loving wife and mother she could be. While she was thinking about how to get Jimmy to talk to her, a car pulled up to the house, and a few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. She looked out the window and saw a young man in a suit looking at her. She opened the door and he asked, "Are you Linda Jacobs?" Worried that maybe something had happened to Molly or Jimmy, she replied, "Yes, that's me. Is everything okay?" The young man held out a folder to her and said, "Mrs. Jacobs, you have been served." He took a quick picture of her with the package and then turned and walked back to his car. Linda didn't understand what he was saying, walked to the living room, sat down on the couch, and opened the envelope. Pulling out the papers, she saw on the first page it read, "Petition for divorce." Tears came to her eyes. She dropped the papers, and for the first time truly realized that she had probably abandoned her marriage and her family for some lousy entertainment. A few days after Linda received the divorce petition, Jimmy started getting calls from all over the family. Linda's parents were calling and asking how Jimmy could take her child away from her, move out, and divorce his wife over some minor disagreement and argument. Don't destroy your marriage because you are arguing about the proper way to raise your daughter. get together, and work it out. Then he got a call from his parents. Jimmy, what are you doing? Linda says you're divorcing her, not talking to her, and hiding your daughter from her. She says you're just going through a rough patch in your marriage and that she loves you and wants her family back. Jimmy, that doesn't sound like you. It seems very harsh for just a series of arguments and disagreements. Jimmy's brother's wife Amanda then called and scolded him. Jimmy, how can you stop talking to Dan about arguing over tools? And how can you think about divorcing Linda for such minor reasons? You need help, Jimmy. Maybe see a counselor. Jimmy tried to ignore all of this, and his standard line on the phone was that this was a very personal matter between Linda, Molly, and himself, and they should go back and ask Linda if they wanted to really understand why reconciliation wasn't going to happen and why divorce was the only way out for him. But that didn't help. He kept getting calls. Then they started calling Molly with the same phrases and urging her to come home and be with her mother, whose heart was broken. Molly could see the pain this was causing Jimmy, and that the whole family now thought he was the bad guy. She saw perfectly well that Dan wasn't telling anyone the truth and blamed his problems with Jimmy on the loss of some of Jimmy's tools. Molly saw that Linda was trying to pull together all the family resources to talk Jimmy and Molly into coming back. But to get their support, she never admitted to her actions or told them the true story. She knew that Jimmy would never do it, that he would allow his entire relationship to be poisoned by Linda's betrayal, and that he was too ethical to spread the dirt and the real truth that would destroy Linda's relationship. But Molly had had enough. One day during class at school, she pulled out her computer and wrote a letter to the whole family. It read, "To all the family members who are so quick to blame my dad for all the problems between Mom and us and Dan and him. It pains me deeply to send you the attached video, and I know it will shock and hurt you all as it did me when I walked into this nightmare and recorded it. It is extremely unfair that Jimmy should be punished by his family for something he did not do. He was betrayed by his wife, his brother, and now his family. I've had enough. Please watch this and ask yourself what you would do if you were in my father's situation. What would you do in my situation? What would you do when two people who you thought loved you, protected you, and would always be on your side betrayed you in the most horrible way and continue to lie about it and are not held accountable? Please watch the attached video in private, and then you can discuss with my mom and Uncle Dan all you want about how Jimmy should react." With that, she copied the entire family. Her father, who she knew would be furious, but she felt it was her duty to support him, and Linda and Dan. Then, with the same old anger and hurt coming back to her, she hit the send button. Linda was at work and hadn't seen the private email, and her phone at work was turned off. As she walked out to the parking lot and got into her car at the end of the workday, she turned on her phone, hoping to see some response from Jimmy to her daily calls, pleading for forgiveness, asking for a chance to explain things, asking her to come home and talk. Instead, she saw missed calls from her parents, from Amanda, and from Jimmy's parents. First, she listened to the voicemail from Amanda. "You're a bitch and a slut. Not only did you ruin Jimmy's life with your sordid affair with Dan, you ruined my life. I never want to speak to you again, and I will be Jimmy's strongest witness in the divorce if possible. He treated you with respect and love and did everything with the family in mind, and you ruined everything with your cheap, promiscuous behavior. Dan might want to come and stay with you because his ass is going to get kicked out of here tonight." Linda never realized if Dan had confessed or what had happened, but she got the feeling that the family knew what had really happened. The next voicemail was from her mom. "Linda, how could you? I was so disgusted watching that video. And with your brother Jimmy, and in your marital bed. And then poor Molly walks in and witnesses her mother and uncle disgustingly betraying her husband, herself, and the whole family. How could you?" With those words, she sobbed and hung up the phone. Linda sank into the driver's seat and cried. She opened her email on her iPhone and saw an email from Molly. She didn't want to open the video, as she was sure she knew exactly what it was, but did so nonetheless to see how it would look from the rest of the family's perspective. Linda realized it was over. Her attempts to get her family to help Jimmy talk to her and change her mind were in the past. What was she thinking? More lies, more disrespect, and an unwillingness to admit her actions were perhaps as bad as the illicit affair itself. She realized she was just fooling herself. There was no getting that back, not with Jimmy. He was too hurt, too disrespected, and she realized that she had lost any close and loving connection to her daughter forever. She no longer had the right to even act as a parent to her. Any advice and guidance she gave her would be a hypocritical joke. She cried for an hour in the parking lot before she could start the car and drive home. 3 weeks later, Jimmy's lawyer called and informed her that since she hadn't signed and returned the divorce papers, he had scheduled a court hearing to be held in 2 weeks. He suggested that she hire an attorney and prepare. Linda went to a lawyer on the advice of her friend who had cheated on her husband and was going through a divorce. She told the lawyer honestly and openly about what she and Dan had been doing and how she had gotten to this point. After reviewing the documents, the attorney told her, "Your husband is being quite generous with his behavior, as everything is split 50-50. It doesn't look like he's hiding any money or trying to influence you in any way by publicizing the video. Except for one thing. He is asking for 100% custody of your daughter. It's very rare for a judge to grant that, so at this point I think we'll just go to court, dismiss that part of the divorce petition and leave it up to the judge." When they appeared in court, she saw Molly and Jimmy for the first time in 8 weeks. They looked rested, and Molly looked older and more mature than Linda remembered her. Neither Jimmy nor Molly even made eye contact with each other, and when she tried to talk to them in the hallway before entering the courthouse, they just turned and walked away. "I'm so sorry, please don't hate me forever. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't bear the thought of you hating me forever. If you could find the strength to at least maintain a relationship, I would be very grateful." With these words, they entered the courtroom and the proceedings began. When they got to the point of 100% custody, the judge faltered and was ready to rule on the standard 50-50 split. At that point, Jimmy's attorney looked at Molly and said to the judge, "Your Honor, before you make a full decision on my client's case, my daughter has asked to come up to the bench and talk to you a little bit." The judge responded that this was very unusual, but given her age, I would allow it. Molly stepped forward, and both attorneys also approached the bench to listen. Molly addressed the judge. "Please, Your Honor, I don't want to live with my mother. She has damaged our relationship beyond repair. If you award her custody, I can honestly tell you that I will run away. I will not stay in her house one night. I'm going to ask you to watch this short video and realize that this is exactly what I stumbled upon one day when I got home from school early. The man in the video is my uncle, my father's brother. It went on for 3 months and probably wouldn't have ended if she hadn't been caught." With those words, she started the video and handed the judge her phone. His demeanor and body language changed as he watched the video. He handed the phone back and asked everyone to return to their seats. He said, "I am going to give 100% custody to the father, as per the petition. So the father is not going to pay child support, and given his salary, I'm not going to ask the mother to pay child support. However, with respect to custody, I am going to order that the mother will have weekly 2-hour visits with her daughter. For the first 6 months, these visits will be in counseling sessions paid for by the father. He is invited, but his presence is not mandatory. This counseling will be an attempt to see if mother and daughter can develop a relationship for the benefit of their future lives." With those words, the judge left the courtroom, stood up, and retired to his chambers. Linda leaned over the table and cried as she looked at the ruling for 100% custody of Jimmy, but at least she had a faint glimmer of hope that with the help of a psychologist, she could mend her relationship with her daughter and perhaps with Jimmy. It was all she had hoped for in her life now, and she desperately wanted to at least make sure her daughter knew that she loved her and realized that she had not only hurt Molly, Jimmy, and the rest of her family, but had ruined her life in the process. No one is without pain, and perhaps the worst pain and hurt that Linda's cheating brought to her was her own. Epilogue. 1 year later. Counseling with Linda and her daughter Molly was successful to some degree. Linda was able to better understand why she might have acted the way she did, and it seemed to her that Molly was able to understand it because of the work the counselor was doing. Not to say that Molly could forgive or justify the act, but she could clearly see that Linda was just as hurt, if not more hurt, than Jimmy and her. Molly realized that despite everything that had happened, she loved her mother and began to spend occasional weekends living in her apartment and spending time with her. Linda learned to treat Molly as an adult, to let her make her own decisions and never criticize her for those decisions. They both knew that if nothing changed, they would be friends with each other in later life. Linda kept apologizing until one day, Molly said that they should just forget about it. Put it in the past and never talk about it again. Linda tried to get any information she could out of Molly about Jimmy, what he looked like, whether he was seeing someone, whether he seemed happy. Molly could see that Linda still loved him very much, but she knew that Jimmy could never trust her or love her again. So Molly never encouraged her mother to dwell on Jimmy, but instead encouraged her to start dating and look for a new beginning in her life. Jimmy never attended any counseling sessions. He was able to reconnect with his parents, and he developed a close relationship with Amanda and her children. She left Dan and was building her life anew. Jimmy, true to his word, never responded to Dan or his parents' attempts to reconcile with Dan. If Dan came to any holiday party, dinner, or event with his parents, Jimmy did not show up. Jimmy hadn't spoken to or seen Dan in a year, and was still confident in his decision to never see or speak to Dan again. For the past year, Jimmy had been consumed primarily by his relationship with Molly and secondarily by work. He didn't go on dates or have fun with guys. Molly had encouraged him to live his life and start dating, and she felt that maybe he was close to getting back into the dating scene. Looking back on her actions, Linda still berates herself for what she did. A 10-week affair with meaningless entertainment, exciting for a moment, but devastating to the lives of those she truly cared about. The guilt and pain she had caused by her actions never left her. She tried to deal with the depression and guilt by becoming a better mother, a better daughter, a better friend, and a better employee in all of her relationships, but she knew her life would never be what it was or could have been. Actions have consequences, and she was stupid enough to think of no consequences when she was possessed by the cheap thrill of illicit entertainment. She threw away the best life she could have had for herself. She confronted her daughter with the reality of adult pain and problems much sooner than she could have hoped. She threw away the love, trust, partnership, and joy she had in her family and knew she would never experience it again. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.